When I was a boy, I used to think our land was the entire world. It stretched beyond the creek across the old willow trees and into the golden fields where the sun sank each evening behind Grandpa's cabin. The porch creaked in harmony with the wind, and the scent of pine mingled with the smoke from his old wood stove. That patch of earth 30 acres passed down from my great-grandfather wasn't just where we lived. It was who we were. 3 generations had grown up there. My father was born in the back bedroom of the cabin. I learned how to ride a bike down the gravel driveway and how to fish off the wooden dock Grandpa built with his bare hands. We planted oak trees every spring, carved our initials into the barn door, and flew the American flag proudly from the weathered pole Grandpa had sunk into the front lawn the day he returned from Vietnam. He used to say, "This land remembers," and I believed him. Grandpa, whose name was Samuel Blake, had been a soldier, a mechanic, a carpenter, and later a teacher. But above all else, he was a steward of memory, of soil, and of pride. He never missed a sunrise. He wore his old dog tags like a second skin. And every morning, like clockwork, he'd step out onto the porch, hand over heart, and salute that flag as it swayed in the breeze, no matter the weather, no matter how frail his hands had grown. The neighbors respected him. People called him Coach Sam or Mr. Blake, depending on whether they knew him from the high school or from the veterans' meetings. Children brought him pumpkins in October and cookies at Christmas. So when the new subdivision crept closer, when concrete roads replaced the dusty trail, and neat little houses with pristine lawns appeared at our boundary line, we didn't fight it. We stayed, because this was home. Us. It started quietly like most storms do, a neatly folded letter in our mailbox, a crisp envelope with the HOA's logo embossed in gold. I remember Grandpa holding it in his palm like it was a foreign object. Not angry, not worried, just puzzled. Homeowners Association, he said aloud. Didn't know we were homeowners under anyone. The letter included a map, a welcoming message, and a list of community guidelines. It looked harmless, even cheerful. But on the third page in fine print was a clause stating that properties within the newly annexed boundary would now be subject to certain aesthetic regulations, including lawn care fencing height and structure appearance. At the bottom in red ink was a note: Flagpole on parcel number 127B does not meet visual compliance. Recommend removal within 30 days. That flagpole, the one Grandpa had installed in 1973 using salvaged steel from his unit's old transport trailer, was more than a pole. It was a monument, a memory, a marker of every fallen friend he never got to say goodbye to. He folded the paper once, twice, and tucked it behind the coffee pot without a word. But I saw the fire flicker behind his eyes. We thought it was just a misunderstanding. Surely the HOA had mistakenly added our property to their jurisdiction. After all, the cabin stood on land that had been in our family since 1929. The deed was clear. The taxes were paid. The survey lines hadn't changed, but the letters kept coming. Requests to update the exterior paint on the barn, complaints about non-regulation fencing, and then the accusation that Grandpa was living in a non-permitted structure, not intended for long-term habitation. They meant the cabin, the same one built by his father, the one with smoke still curling from the chimney each dawn, the one where we had our Thanksgivings, our funerals, our summer dinners with fresh corn and fireflies dancing at the window. They wanted him gone, not because he was loud or dangerous or disruptive, but because he didn't fit the brochure. One night I found him sitting on the porch, the flag gently fluttering behind him, casting long shadows in the moonlight. They don't understand what this place means, I said. He nodded. They don't care what it means. They only care what it looks like. Silence. Then he added quietly, but firmly, "But I'm not leaving." Neither was I. Because sometimes land isn't just acreage, it's legacy. And no board, No signature, no gold embossed envelope would ever take that from us. It wasn't long after that night on the porch that the HOA made its next move. Another letter arrived, this time hand-delivered in a manila envelope sealed with a red sticker that read, "Urgent compliance required." I opened it at the kitchen table while Grandpa stirred the fire. The paper was thicker, heavier, as if the weight of bureaucracy could somehow legitimize its contents. The flagpole located at the front of parcel number 127B is in violation of Hawthorne Meadows HOA visual uniformity guidelines. As stated in Article 6, Section 3, no structure exceeding 6 feet in height may be erected on any lot without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee, ARC. This includes, but is not limited to, towers, antennas, poles, and other vertical constructs not explicitly exempted by ordinance. At the bottom, scrawled in mechanical ink, remove or relocate within 14 days to avoid penalties. And then a signature. Karen Stroud, President Hawthorne Meadows, HOA. Karen had only moved into the neighborhood 6 months prior. A retired real estate agent with too much time and too little grace. She ran the HOA with an iron clipboard and a smile that never reached her eyes. We'd seen her around, always brisk, always inspecting something with narrowed eyes and pursed lips. She had once fined a neighbor for hanging a hummingbird feeder that clashed with the siding. When she came for Grandpa's flagpole, it wasn't just about the rules. It was about control. Hives. That weekend she came in person. A silver SUV pulled up just past the oak trees, parking deliberately off the gravel road. She stepped out in tennis shoes far too white for country soil, holding a leather folder under one arm, and her phone already recording with the other. "Good morning," she called. "I'm with the HOA and I just wanted to follow up on the non-compliance notice regarding the flagpole." Grandpa stood on the porch unmoving. I walked out to meet her halfway, hoping to keep the tension from boiling too soon. "The flagpole's been here for 50 years, I said. "It's on private land, not HOA land." Karen didn't blink. "That's currently under review. The annexation brought this property within HOA bounds, and any structures deemed non-conforming must be approved or removed. Annexation doesn't override a recorded deed," I replied. "We have documents dating back to 1929. She gave a tight smile. "Then I'd be happy to see those at our next RC meeting. Until then, I'm going to have to list this property as non-compliant. Also," she gestured vaguely toward the lake, "we've noticed what appears to be an unregistered dwelling being used full-time." Her eyes landed on the cabin. Grandpa took a step forward. "That unregistered dwelling," he said, voice gravelly but clear, "is my home." Karen tilted her head. "I understand, but these rules are for everyone's benefit. We're trying to maintain the aesthetic value of the neighborhood." He pointed to the flag. "That's not aesthetics. That's memory." She sighed. "Well, unfortunately, we can't make exceptions for nostalgia." The following day, we received 3 notices in the mail. One for the flagpole, one for the cabin, and one for refusal to comply with community outreach efforts. Grandpa didn't speak much that afternoon. He spent it rewrapping the rope on the flagpole, sanding down a splinter that had appeared from weathering. As dusk fell, he hoisted the flag again, slow, deliberate, like always. This time, when he saluted, I stood beside him, hand over heart, watching the flag rise over the land we had always called ours. It was the beginning of a war we never asked for. But if they wanted to challenge our right to be here, to erase the history planted in every tree, every nail, every quiet morning coffee on that porch, then we would answer. Not with shouting, not with threats, but with truth and time and the quiet, unmoving strength of a man who had seen real battles and wasn't about to surrender to a homeowners association. 3 days after the last notice arrived, Karen returned. This time she didn't park on the road. She drove her SUV right up to the edge of our yard, tires crunching over the gravel, leaving a fresh trail where wildflowers once grew. She stepped out in slacks and a pressed white blouse, clipboard in hand, wearing sunglasses despite the heavy clouds rolling in. But this wasn't a polite follow-up. It was an inspection. I watched from the kitchen window as she marched toward the cabin heels, clicking with purpose. Grandpa was out back fixing a broken fence post by the dock. I figured I'd intercept her before she made it too far. But Karen didn't wait. She walked right past the private property sign, stepped onto the porch, and knocked 3 sharp raps, like a school principal summoning a truant student. When I opened the door, she didn't greet me. She flipped her clipboard open and said, "I'm here to document existing violations, as outlined in Article 6, subsection 12.1 of the Hawthorne Meadows HOA guidelines." I leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "You're trespassing." She didn't flinch. "According to our overlay, this land falls within the annexed district. As such, the HOA has a right to enforce compliance. Enforcement requires legal jurisdiction," I said. "You don't have it. Not here." Karen stepped back slightly, raising her phone again. "I'm recording this interaction for safety, and I need to inform you that unauthorized long-term occupancy of accessory structures is a direct violation of safety codes." "You're—" She pointed at the cabin. "Guest must vacate immediately." I followed her gesture. "You mean my grandfather?" She blinked. "He lives here full-time. This is his house." Karen jotted something down, then asked, "Is he listed on the HOA registry?" I almost laughed. "Lady, he was here before the registry even existed." She pursed her lips. "That may be, but unless his residency is approved by the Architectural Review Committee, it's considered camping, which is only permitted for short durations. I'll be issuing a notice of non-compliance." At that moment, Grandpa stepped onto the porch. He wore his usual flannel shirt sleeves rolled up dirt under his fingernails, but around his neck hung his dog tags shining against the worn cotton like they did every Memorial Day. Karen turned momentarily startled. Grandpa didn't speak. He simply nodded, eyes calm, hands steady. Karen looked from him to the flag, then to her clipboard. And for a moment, just a moment, her posture faltered. "Hustle." She walked around the cabin muttering to herself, snapping photos of everything. The weathered swing hanging from the oak, the firewood stacked against the side, the iron weather vane shaped like a horse atop the barn. Then she walked toward the lake. I followed in silence. At the edge of the dock, she paused, staring at the wooden platform Grandpa had rebuilt last summer. The wood was new, but the foundation old concrete pylons sunk deep into the shoreline had been there since 1947. She took another picture. Then she asked, "What's that structure classified as recreational or residential?" I raised an eyebrow. "It's classified as none of your business." Her nostrils flared. "This kind of hostility," she said, "only makes the process harder for everyone involved. We are trying to create a unified and pleasant environment." Grandpa, who had walked up behind me, added softly, "Pleasant for who?" Karen turned. "For the community." He looked around at the open fields, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, the old barn in the distance. "This is the community," he said. "You just built next to it." By the time she left, we had 3 more notices tacked onto the clipboard this time, accompanied by a deadline. "Remove the flagpole. Vacate the cabin. Submit property modifications for approval. 14 days. That night, Grandpa sat in his chair, sipping tea, his expression unreadable. I asked him what he was thinking. He said, "It's easy to feel small when paper tells you who you are, but I've seen men write laws and change them the next day. What doesn't change is truth." Then he pulled out an old wooden box from under the couch. Inside was every deed receipt, tax record, and survey map our family ever kept. He placed it on the table with a soft thud. "Tomorrow," he said, "we remind them who really owns this land." It was the second Monday of the month, the day the HOA held its open meetings in the community center off Hawthorne Ridge. Normally those meetings were about things like lawn height or mailbox design, but this time we were on the agenda. Item 3. Flagpole and unauthorized occupancy dispute parcel number 127B. I arrived early with Grandpa. He wore his uniform jacket that night, the dark green one with brass buttons, and a faded patch over the heart that read U.S. Army 3rd Infantry. He'd brushed the dust off his boots, combed back his white hair, and walked with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who had nothing to prove but everything to protect. In his hands he carried the old wooden box. I carried the copies. Inside the meeting hall, folding chairs were set up in neat rows. A long plastic table faced the crowd, where the HOA board sat Karen dead center surrounded by 4 other members. A few neighbors were in the back, murmuring quietly. I saw curious glances, some sympathetic, some wary. Karen tapped her microphone. "We'll now hear from the residents at 127B. I stood helping Grandpa up beside me. The room hushed. "Thank you," I began. "My name is Jake Morgan. This is my grandfather, Samuel Morgan. Our family has lived on that land since 1929. Karen held up a hand. "Mr. Morgan. Before you proceed, we'd like to remind you that the HOA has jurisdiction over the annexed properties as of the vote passed last March. Your parcel is included in the new district." I nodded. "That's what your map says. But your map is wrong." I handed copies of our documents to each board member. They took them hesitantly. Karen only glanced at hers. "That's a county deed from 1929. Here's a property tax record from 1946. Here's the boundary survey from 1961, signed by the original township engineer. And here I unfolded a yellowed, fragile sheet of parchment, is the map showing the original Morgan boundary lines certified and notarized in 1930. Our cabin. Our dock. Our flagpole. All on private, unincorporated land." Karen looked unimpressed. "None of that negates the need to conform to HOA aesthetic and occupancy standards." I took a breath. "It does when the land was never included in the original HOA charter. Your annexation doesn't hold unless it's accepted by the property owner." Grandpa stepped forward. His voice, though aged, rang clear. "I never accepted anything." A murmur moved through the room. He pointed a shaking finger at Karen. "You think I'm just some old man clinging to a memory. But that flag you want to tear down, I raised it the day I came home from Korea. That cabin you call a code violation. I built it with my brothers after burying my father under that oak tree. This land isn't yours to regulate. It's ours to remember." Karen blinked. Grandpa pulled a folded envelope from his coat and placed it on the board table. It was from the county assessor's office confirming the parcel had never been subject to HOA dues or agreements. Legally, we were independent. The room went silent. Then one of the board members, a younger woman with glasses, cleared her throat. "Karen, if this is true, we may not have grounds for enforcement." Karen's jaw tightened. "We'll need time to review these claims. But until then, I interrupted. "You will cease all notices, threats, or attempts to evict my grandfather from his home, or will file a cease and desist and pursue action under Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act for deprivation of rights under color of law." Someone gasped. Karen tried to regain composure. "We're just trying to maintain community harmony." "Harmony isn't built on threats," I replied. "It's built on respect." After the meeting, several neighbors came to shake Grandpa's hand. One of them, Mr. Billings, a retired school principal, clapped him on the back and said, "You reminded them what real backbone looks like." Karen stormed out the back without saying a word, but I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't the kind to back down quietly, and neither were we. The morning after the meeting, I expected things to calm down. They didn't. Instead, we woke to find a new notice nailed to our split-rail fence. Not mailed, not taped politely, but nailed through the wood like a warning. A bright red sticker across the top read, "Final Enforcement Warning." It was signed by Karen herself. Despite the evidence we'd presented, despite the legal documents, she wasn't letting go. The notice claimed we were in open violation of HOA health and safety standards, and that a removal order had been issued for the cabin and the non-regulation flag structure effective in 72 hours. Grandpa stared at it for a long time, the paper flapping in the breeze. He didn't say a word, just turned and walked back into the cabin. Later that afternoon, I found him in the attic. He was going through boxes, old medals, faded photographs, a map with pencil lines drawn by hand, and then carefully folded in a canvas wrap, his full dress uniform, the one he hadn't worn in years. He looked up and said, "If they're coming to take my home, they'll have to look me in the eye." That evening I watched him shave with care. Iron the creases into his trousers, polish the brass buttons. He adjusted his lapel pin, the Purple Heart tucked just under the American flag, and stepped outside as the sun began to fall behind the tree line. He walked to the front gate and stood, just stood. No sign, no protest, just a man in uniform, back straight, hands behind his back, guarding the place he called home. The neighbors noticed. Mrs. Dupree from down the road brought him a thermos of sweet tea. She told me later she hadn't seen a sight that noble since her husband came home from Vietnam. A few kids rode by on bikes and saluted. Grandpa smiled and saluted back, but Karen returned the next morning, this time with backup. 2 private security guards wearing black shirts with HOA compliance, stitched in white thread, stood behind her. One had a body cam strapped to his chest. The other held a clipboard. Karen stood just beyond the gate, staring at Grandpa through her sunglasses. "We're here to begin enforcement," she said loudly. Grandpa didn't move. Karen motioned to the guards. One stepped forward. I stepped out of the house, camera in hand, already recording. "You are trespassing on private land," I said. "You've been notified legally. This property is not under your jurisdiction." Karen ignored me. "This is your last warning, sir," she said to Grandpa. "You need to vacate. We have documentation. We have witnesses." Grandpa tilted his head. Then softly he said, "Where were you when I carried my friend's body up a hill in Inchin?" The guards hesitated. Karen frowned. "That's irrelevant." "Where were you," he continued, "when we slept in holes in snow for a flag? You now want me to take down?" The security guards looked at each other. One lowered his clipboard. Karen stepped back. "I fought for this land," Grandpa said. "And not just mine. Yours. All of ours. You want to take this away, do it yourself." Silence. Even the birds stopped chirping. Karen clenched her jaw, spun around, and walked away. The guards following slowly behind. Later that night, Grandpa sat on the porch with me. He didn't seem angry, just tired, but proud. Sometimes he said you don't win with fists or threats. You win by standing still. Long enough for the truth to find its voice. The footage I captured of that standoff, Grandpa in uniform, standing tall while Karen tried to order him off his own land, was powerful. But I hadn't expected it to travel far. That night I uploaded it to a small veterans forum along with a brief caption. HOA tries to evict a decorated veteran from land he's lived on for 70 years. A few friends shared it. Then a cousin reposted it to Facebook. Then it landed on Reddit and exploded. By morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Thousands of shares. Tens of thousands of comments. Some people were outraged. Others emotional. Nearly everyone was stunned by the image, a man in full uniform guarding his home against a clipboard-wielding bureaucrat who refused to read the law. News outlets started reaching out. First a local affiliate, then a regional station, and then, just after noon, I got a call from a national news producer. They wanted to run the story. Veteran confronts HOA over land dispute. And send a team out for interviews. Grandpa wasn't thrilled about the attention. "I'm not doing this to be famous," he muttered. "I just want them to leave us alone." "I know," I said. "But if the world sees the truth, maybe they will." By the weekend, a news van pulled into our driveway. 2 reporters, one holding a mic, the other operating a camera set up on the lawn. They interviewed me first. I explained the history, the documents, the meetings, the notice nailed to our fence like a threat from the Wild West. I pointed out the flagpole still standing proud beside the cabin. Then they turned to Grandpa. He sat in his favorite chair under the maple tree, wearing his uniform jacket again, with that same quiet fire in his eyes. "Why not just move?" the reporter asked. He looked at her calm and steady. "Because this isn't just a house," he said. "It's memory. It's sacrifice. It's mine." The interview aired that night. By morning, the video had nearly 2 million views. People were sending messages from all over the country. Veterans, lawyers, even members of Congress. A GoFundMe someone started to support Mr. Morgan's legal defense raised over $30,000 in just 24 hours. Signs began to appear around the neighborhood. "We stand with Mr. Morgan. Honor our veterans, not harass them." Even the mayor of the nearest town issued a public statement in support, calling the HOA's actions deeply misguided and disrespectful. Karen, she was nowhere to be seen. No more notices. No more security guards. But her silence only deepened the pressure. One afternoon, a woman knocked on our door. She was in her 60s, hair tied back in a silver braid, holding a folded American flag in her arms. "My husband served with the 3rd Infantry," she said. "He died in 1983. I saw the video. I wanted you to have this." Grandpa took the flag with trembling hands, nodding in gratitude. He didn't say much. But that night he sat by the flagpole watching the wind ripple the stars and stripes. He was no longer standing alone. It started with a single tent, a green canvas dome pitched neatly beside the eastern fence line of our land, right where the tall grass meets the slope leading down to the lake. 2 men in fatigues were unfolding camp chairs, sipping coffee from tin mugs and watching the sunrise. By noon, there were 7 more tents, and by the end of the day, our front pasture looked like a field encampment. American flags flying from tent poles, fire pits built from stone rings, and a large hand-painted banner stretched between 2 trees that read, "Veterans stand with Sergeant Samuel Morgan." They weren't there for protest. They were there for presence. Word had spread quickly through the veteran community. The footage, the interviews, the silence from the HOA. To them, this wasn't just about Grandpa. It was about principle. About honoring those who'd sacrificed and protecting the dignity that service earned. They came from everywhere. A Marine from Arizona who drove 100 miles in a pickup truck covered in decals. A retired Navy nurse from Michigan who brought trays of homemade lasagna. Even a wheelchair-bound Air Force veteran who said simply, "I know what it's like to be forgotten. Not this time." The air around our property felt different, reverent, watchful. Some brought guitars and sang old ballads around the fire at night. Others spent mornings cleaning the edges of the trail, helping us reinforce the fence, or fixing the squeaky boards on the dock. The energy wasn't loud, but it was unshakable. A few local officials dropped by awkwardly at first. Then, gratefully, one city councilwoman handed Grandpa a plaque for resolute patriotism and unyielding civic integrity. He blinked slowly, smiled, and shook her hand. Shook. But not everyone was pleased. Karen showed up again on the 3rd morning. She didn't come alone. She brought a clipboard, a man in a gray suit, and a drone, which they flew over the property without permission. They stood at the edge of our driveway watching the veterans laugh and talk around the campfire. Karen shouted over the fence, "This is an unauthorized gathering. You're violating municipal codes regarding occupancy, fire hazard, and organized demonstration." The response: a group of veterans calmly turned toward her, forming a line. One of them, a tall man with deep scars on his face and an old 101st Airborne patch on his jacket, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "this isn't a protest. This is America." Karen turned red. The man in the suit whispered something to her. They left a few minutes later, the drone buzzing awkwardly above their heads. That night, a photo was posted online. It showed Grandpa standing at dusk beside his flagpole, flanked on either side by veterans in uniform. The caption read, A man stood for his land and his brothers stood with him. By morning, the post had 5 million likes. The impact rippled further than we imagined. Local high school students organized a letter-writing campaign, sending hundreds of messages to the county board demanding HOA oversight reform. A legal nonprofit offered free representation to Grandpa and any veteran facing HOA harassment. Even a state legislator released a video statement. No organization, public or private, has the right to erase the legacy of those who served this country. Sergeant Morgan's stand is a reminder of the America we owe our heroes. And every evening as the sun dipped below the tree line, the veterans would line up, salute the flag on our property, and sing quietly. Voices weathered but firm. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave? They weren't just honoring Grandpa. They were honoring something deeper. A truth that couldn't be legislated, zoned, or filed into silence. We didn't expect him to come. When the black SUV pulled up that morning, clean official with the state emblem glinting on the license plate, we thought maybe it was another journalist or legal volunteer. But when the passenger door opened and a sharply dressed man in a navy blazer stepped out flanked by 2 aides, the veterans around the camp straightened up immediately. It was State Senator Michael Grayson, a decorated Gulf War veteran and now one of the most respected voices in the legislature on property rights and veterans affairs. Grandpa was in the barn checking the hinges on the storm shutters when I found him. "You've got a visitor," I said. "A big one." He wiped his hands on a rag, brushed dust off his shirt, and followed me outside. Senator Grayson didn't hesitate. He walked right up to Grandpa and extended a hand. "Sergeant Morgan," he said, voice steady. "I've read about you, but standing here I understand it better." Grandpa shook his hand. "Didn't expect this kind of commotion over a flagpole in a shack." The senator smiled. "It's never about just the pole or the shack. It's about what they represent and who gets to decide." They walked together down the property line. The senator asked about the family history, about the cabin by the lake, about Grandpa's service. Then they paused at the flagpole, weathered but proud, where the American flag fluttered gently in the summer breeze. A press van arrived a few minutes later, but the senator didn't perform for the cameras. Instead, he gave a quiet press statement. "I'm here today not as a politician, but as a fellow veteran. This land has belonged to Sergeant Morgan's family for 3 generations. The attempts by the local HOA to erase that history, under the guise of community standards, are not only legally questionable, they are morally indefensible. I will personally introduce legislation this session to clarify the limits of HOA authority when it comes to privately owned land and veterans' memorials. Let this serve as a message to every HOA across this state. You do not get to rewrite the legacy of our heroes." Applause broke out not from a crowd, but from the veterans standing around, and a few neighbors who had gathered near the fence. Karen did not show up that day, but the HOA's lawyer sent a letter by courier, a stiff, thinly veiled warning that our media attention was undermining community peace, and they were exploring legal remedies. The timing couldn't have been worse for them. That very evening, a major news network ran an extended feature on Grandpa's story. They interviewed neighbors, filmed the camp of veterans, showed photos of Grandpa in uniform from decades past, and overlaid it with the senator's statement. The episode aired during prime time. Over 10 million people watched. The public outcry was immediate and enormous. HOA hotlines were flooded with angry calls. The State Board of HOA Regulation received formal complaints not just about ours, but from people all over who had been quietly mistreated by their own community boards for years. A wave had begun. The next morning, Grandpa received a handwritten letter delivered by a retired postmaster who volunteered to bring it in person. It was from the Car's governor. The envelope bore the state seal. Inside, on thick parchment, were just 3 short paragraphs. "Sergeant Morgan, your courage and dignity have reminded this state of what true leadership looks like. Your story has brought to light an issue we can no longer ignore. On behalf of the people of this state, I thank you. We stand with you. Always. Enclosed was a McGovernor's commendation for civil integrity and public courage. Grandpa read it quietly, folded it neatly, and placed it next to his military medals. He didn't cry, but when he stepped outside that night, looked out over the encampment, the flags and the flickering campfires, his voice cracked just a little as he said, I guess I didn't serve in vain after all. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. The HOA board had been unusually quiet for over a week. No new letters, no new inspections. Not even a shadow of Karen's SUV circling the gravel paths like a hawk looking for its next prey. But we knew something was coming because silence from people like her doesn't mean retreat. It means regrouping, and sure enough, it came. Not a notice, not a warning, but a flyer. Taped to mailboxes, folded under windshield wipers, slipped into screen doors. Special HOA meeting. Emergency session closed to public. That was all it said. No agenda, no explanation. Just a quiet summons with Karen's name still printed at the bottom in her usual bold font, like she expected people to obey out of habit. But this time they didn't. Instead of attending in silence, a dozen homeowners showed up outside the clubhouse that night. Not with torches, but with questions. And a few with cell phones recording everything. They weren't hostile. They were done being passive. Inside the meeting, things reportedly turned chaotic. We didn't get a full picture, but word spread fast. Someone had asked why the HOA had pursued enforcement against a veteran on his own land. Someone else brought up the lawsuit threats and the HOA's rapidly rising legal expenses. Then came the final blow. One of the board members stood and read the full property deed aloud, confirming what Grandpa had said from the start, that the cabin, the flagpole, and the land beneath it had been so explicitly exempt from HOA jurisdiction since before the development was even planned. Karen tried to interrupt. Someone asked her bluntly, Did you know this when you ordered the notices? She didn't answer. Instead, she stood up, gathered her binder, and walked out the back door without another word. By morning, an email went out to all HOA members. Subject: Leadership Update. Body: Karen R. has voluntarily stepped down from her role as HOA president, effective immediately. A special election will be held in accordance with bylaws. No apology, no admission. But the message was clear. Holmes. Later that week, the HOA posted a second email, shorter, quieter. We acknowledge a misinterpretation of property boundaries regarding the Morgan family residence. We apologize for any distress caused, and affirm that the Morgan property is not subject to HOA oversight. It wasn't perfect, but it was public, and more importantly, it was done. A few days later, a small group of neighbors came by with baked goods and lemonade. One of them, a young mom who had lived nearby for years, but never said much, handed Grandpa a card. It had a picture of a soaring eagle and a simple note inside. Thanks for reminding us what it means to stand for something. You've made this place feel like home again. He didn't say much, just offered them a seat on the porch and poured glasses for everyone. Bakil. The veterans began packing up their tents soon after. Some left small flags behind, planted in the soil like silent tributes. Others promised to visit again. When the last fire pit was raked over and the last cot folded, Grandpa stood at the edge of the field and saluted each departing vehicle. The fight was over. Not because someone gave in, but because the truth stood taller than the noise and didn't flinch. And Karen, she sold her house 3 weeks later. The oak trees rustled above us as the sun crept over the ridge, golden light spilling across the field like honey. The flag swayed gently in the breeze, stitched with decades of wear, but still proud, still whole. Grandpa sat in his rocking chair on the porch mug of black coffee in hand. I stood beside him, leaning against the railing, both of us watching the lake sparkle in the distance. There was a peace now, a steady hum in the air, like the land had finally exhaled after holding its breath far too long. "You ever think about leaving?" I asked softly. He didn't answer right away, just sipped his coffee, eyes locked on the far side of the property, where the wildflowers had started blooming again after a long winter. Then he said, "Every soldier thinks about running at some point. The noise, the pushback, the losses. But it ain't in the running that you find peace. It's in standing where you're meant to stand even if no one claps when you do it." He paused, voice gravelly. "That flagpole my daddy built it with hands that came home from war, broken, but not beaten. Your grandma stitched that flag herself after his funeral. This land is the last thing we still have that hasn't been bought paved or compromised. We move, we lose more than dirt. We lose memory. We lose proof." Proof. That word settled in my chest like a stone, because that's what this land had become. Not just a place to live, but a living testimony to resilience. It held the story of a family that didn't always win, but always endured. A grandfather who faced down bureaucracy and petty cruelty, not with fists or fury, but with presence, dignity, and truth. There was a knock on the door later that morning. It was a group of high school students, part of a civic engagement class, asking if Grandpa would speak at their Veterans Day assembly. They wanted to hear about the fight with the HOA, sure, but more than that, they wanted to hear why. He stayed. He agreed. Quietly, of course. Grandpa never chased microphones. And at the school auditorium the following week, he stood at the podium in his old uniform medals, lined across his chest, hands slightly shaking from age but not fear. He spoke of service, of sacrifice, of the strange battles fought not just on foreign soil, but in the backyard, against red tape prejudice and apathy. "They told me my flagpole didn't fit the aesthetic," he said. "But you know what really doesn't fit the aesthetic of freedom silence? Complicity. Shrugging your shoulders when something wrong is happening right in front of you." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He ended with this: "My family never left because this land isn't just ours. It's who we are. You don't walk away from your name. You don't back down from your story. And you sure as hell don't let anyone rewrite it for you." They gave him a standing ovation.
Basad.
Back at the farm, life returned to its slow rhythm. Birdsong, tractor hum, the creak of the porch swing, but it felt different, grounded, stronger. Neighbors stopped by more often now, not out of pity, but out of respect. Kids asked Grandpa to sign old photos. Local veterans hosted monthly meetups on our lawn. The cabin near the lake, once nearly ordered torn down, became a retreat space for struggling vets and their families. And every morning, without fail, Grandpa raised the flag with his hand over his heart. Some days I did it with him, some days I just watched. But always, always I remembered that in a world where people often bow to small tyrants in nice suits and self-appointed titles, one man stood still, unshaken, and taught us what legacy truly meant. We never moved, because this land never gave up on us. And we refused to give up on it. Not then, not now, not ever.